Good evening. Welcome. My name is Pat Cawiezell, and I am the buyer and author program coordinator at Magic City Books. And I want to thank you all for taking a little bit of time on this frigid Wednesday evening to be joining us for another in our series of virtual author conversations. We've been doing this for 10 months now, and as is the case with just about everything, there's no end in sight to the virtual programming. Hopefully, later this year, we may be able to do some things outside or find a way to be able to do things in person again. But for right now, we're thankful that we can do something virtually because it is very, very cold here in Tulsa. And we know that we have folks joining us from outside of the Tulsa area, and it's nice to have you spending a little bit of your time with us. We hope it's a little bit nicer weather where you are, although most of the country seems to be under this current vortex of polar conditions. We do have one more author program this week scheduled tomorrow night. Jennifer Taub, who's a professor of law at a school in the Northeast. I can't remember the name of the school now, but she's a professor of law, and she's going to be in conversation with Tulsa's own Barry Friedman about her book that came out last summer, kind of about, it's called Big Dirty Money, and it's just about ways in which the big money operations kind of work and how they have us all kind of wrapped up. And so that's sure to be a fun conversation with Barry leading the charge there. Next week, we have a couple of programs, including another local author, David Trombley, whose memoir is out next Tuesday, and we're going to be talking to him, and a fiction writer who is joining us on Thursday. Her new romance novel is called The Love Proof, kind of a book, if you're familiar with the Rosie Project, is kind of a little bit on those lines, a good kind of, Valentine's romance read for these cold winter nights. And so plan to make us a part of your future entertainment for the evening. MagicCityBooks.com is a full list of all of our upcoming programs. We do have nearly everything is free. Occasionally we do charge just the price of the book to attend the event, and so you can check all that out at MagicCityBooks.com. We will also be posting links to purchase the book tonight through our Square store, and those are that allows you to get a copy of tonight's book, The Chessmen by Michael Wright, and support our nonprofit mission. Magic City Books is owned and operated by the Tulsa Literary Coalition, and so every dollar that you spend with us helps us to be able to bring more authors to our community of readers here in Tulsa and now virtually around the country. So we really hope that you'll be able to do that. We do have the other thing about Zoom is that it allows us to be able to bring in audience questions kind of integrated throughout the program. So if you have a question for Michael tonight, please post it in the Q&A. The Q&A is the easiest place for us to be able to see those questions and get them asked, and we will incorporate as many as we can into our conversation tonight. So links to buy the book in the chat, your questions go in the Q&A. So if you're joining us over on Facebook, I'll be checking that as well as we go along. And so post your questions in the comments there, and I'll bring those back over from Facebook as well. We are really excited to be welcoming Michael back. This is the second novel in his Baltimore trilogy called The Chessmen. The first novel was called Down the Ocean, Summer of '64, and we did an event in the store, what feels like a very, very long time ago. At least everything was just a little bit different back then. But we're really excited that we were able to do this virtually tonight, and are excited for The Chessmen. Michael is an avid explorer dedicated to examining what makes humans so truly wondrous and downright contrary at the same time. His works range from novels and plays to poetry and performance art, spoken word, experiments beyond the merely possible. Michael was the 2010 Playwriting Teacher of the Year for the Association of Theater and Higher Education, and winner of the Kennedy Center 2011 Milan Stitt Award for Outstanding Teaching and Professional Work in Playwriting. His new novel, The Chessmen, is out now. We have, like I said, we have links to purchase the book that we'll post in the chat. Michael, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, it's really my pleasure. And I got to say, for people who might tune in tomorrow, Barry Friedman is a great interviewer. He's one of Tulsa's treasures. So check him out. So,
That's right.
yeah, I'm delighted to be here. And I want to thank everybody for coming, and certainly thank Pat and Magic City for having this event. People outside of Tulsa might not realize that independent bookstores are kind of rare in mid-sized cities, and Magic City Books has really led the way to an explosion of independent bookstores. So I'm very, very pleased to have been able to participate in that.
Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned, Down the Ocean, the previous novel, I was kind of doing a little bit of research and discovered that started out as a short story. And so I just was curious, when you started that as a short story and then you kind of started to expand it to the novel, at what point did you think, boy, I've got more here, and I'm going to explore a little bit more in this, because this is book 2 of a planned trilogy. So at what point did that short story turn into a trilogy of novels?
Well, the trilogy thing is actually a recent notion, because the guy that I work with most often, Frank Crystal, on getting the books online and everything, because he's my tech guru. He said, Amazon and other sellers really like trilogies. They really like quartets of books. And I said, well, yeah. So I came up with the idea of the Baltimore trilogy. The first book was a short story, and having written it, I really liked it. And I thought, well, maybe there's another story. So I wrote that, and, it's kind of like popcorn. You just keep on going. So, I had so much fun writing it. I hadn't written a novel in a long time. I wasn't writing much in the way of theater for a while. So it was great to jump into the ocean, if you will. And for the people who are here from Maryland, I want to show I'm wearing my Baltimore pride here, Cafe On. So just, if you're wondering why is this old guy in a sweatshirt, that's why.
That's great. And, I think that leads into another question, which is, there's a lot of dialect in your books, and you even provide a glossary right at the front so that we can kind of know what we're talking about. Some of the people watching maybe have seen films or TV shows that are set in Baltimore, and maybe a little bit familiar with that kind of the regional accent there. But talk to us a little bit about that kind of specific language and that specific sound of Baltimore.
Yeah, it's odd. And I've had people tell me once or twice over the years when I've demonstrated it, and I'm going to use the dialect tonight in the chapter I'm going to read, that it sounds like Cockney, but it's nothing like it. It's simply a dialect that I think, if I understand correctly what I was given by some of my teachers back in the day, Baltimore was settled by a lot of Polish immigrants, a lot of German immigrants. And so some of the sounds that you might hear come out of that kind of background. It's also, like New York and some other East Coast places, it's a city of Weisenheimers. It's very easy to have a conversation with anybody on the street because everybody's just ready to joke, and they're very friendly for the most part. And I think the accent is a point of pride for a lot of people. Where I grew up, actually, I think people look down a bit on Dundalk as being a blue collar neighborhood and so forth, but I never felt that. I always experienced Baltimore as a pretty equitable place. The accent, I think, gives rise to the best way to express ourselves. There was a great announcer, Chuck Thompson, who did the Orioles games, and when somebody hit a home run, his cry of victory was, "Ain't the beer cold?" I don't know what that means, but it certainly is exuberant, and it's better than score, goal, some of the other stuff.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that you bring up the baseball calls, and it seems as though there was a time when the announcers for those teams really were from that place, or began to kind of became a part of that place. And now so many of them, they're professional broadcasters, and they all sound like Tom Brokaw or whoever, or the guys on the evening news, and everyone kind of plays it pretty straight and down the line. And the true originals just don't seem to be there anymore.
Well, and that's a big point with me. I started to worry once cable TV became a thing. I started to worry as a practitioner of theater and an ear for dialect and everything. I started to really worry that we're going to end up with a homogenized American accent. It actually hasn't happened. I have lots of kids, students from Tahlequah and other places. They all have very specific kinds of accents. My friends from Baltimore, when I've gone back to visit, they still have the dialect, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And I'm not mocking the Baltimore dialect at all when I write it. It's really a tribute to the fact that we've held on to it without really thinking about it too much, because it's just a cultural. It's just in our cultural DNA.
Right. Right. Yeah. The other thing that I want to talk about is, before you get to the reading, was just a little bit about setting these novels in the past and kind of, sometimes that's considered a historical novel, like where the line gets drawn can vary, the mileage varies on that. But, setting this in the early 60s, both of these books are set in the early 60s. Both the first two books are set in the early 60s. And the next one will happen a little bit later, but kind of what was, why choose that time frame? Why choose to be set kind of at that time and not later or earlier or more recently or something like that?
Yeah, I can give you a fairly complicated answer, but I'll just boil it down. When I first started playwriting, I was being heavily influenced by two brilliant writers who were in a workshop that I was in, Donald Margulies and a guy named Jeff Sweet, both from big town urban environments, both with very specific voices that were one Chicago, other New York City. And I tried to write like them for a while because I didn't know what I was doing. And I went to see Apocalypse Now and when it was previewing in New York, and it made me feel so like crazily violent. I didn't know what to do. So I went back to my apartment and I wrote a scene that happened in a pool hall that I used to hang out in Dundalk called Mickey's Billiard Parlor. And I wrote it hearing the dialect there. And suddenly I thought, oh, I've got my voice. I've got my voice. If I live long enough, I certainly would love to write about my years in New York. I lived there for 20 years. I'd love to write about my years in New Orleans for graduate school. Right now, these are the early times that I observed and experienced to a certain extent are the ones that I feel most legitimately able to speak to. Certainly trying to take on New York over a 20-year period. I don't know at this instant even where to begin, but certainly with the two different young men in these two Baltimore novels, I pretty well understand the world that they lived in at that point.
Right. I also was, I was thinking about it because the book, the Chessmen is so set in a place. I mean, it is, you don't have to go very far into the book to really start to feel Baltimore and know that you are in a very specific space. And I wonder if that is as true anymore. In the 1960s, there was more, there was no cable TV. There was more local programming. There was the daily newspaper, the morning and the evening paper in most cities of any size were a regular part of the life there. There weren't a lot of chain restaurants, maybe a few that you could visit if you were on the road or something like that. But in town, it was all local places and stuff. And that sense of a specific place versus, today where every city's got a Pizza Hut, and that's, the pizza that most people are eating Pizza Hut and Papa John's and Domino's, not the local place. Most people are eating their burgers from McDonald's or Applebee's and not the local place. And just, that sense of Baltimore being its own specific place as opposed to New Orleans or New York or Tulsa feels a little like that's less true in 2021 than it was in 1962.
Probably if we talk about degree, but frankly, when you're from there and you go back, especially during the warm months of the year, the first thing you want to try to do is go someplace and have steamed crabs. Yeah. And that's just a reality in throughout Maryland. crab cakes, crab soup. I mean, you can go bananas with all that kind of stuff. I do think it has changed in many ways, but I can't say I've spent a tremendous amount of time back there. My sister lives near Ellicott City, and so when I visit with her, I'm kind of out in that area, Catonsville and so forth. But I'll visit Dundalk because I love it, and I'm still nostalgic about where I grew up. It was a beautiful place to grow up, and my high school is kind of not there anymore, but the grounds are there, and I could still have the memory of experiencing those places. Yeah, I mean, we had the 15-cent hamburger before McDonald's came along, and it was Gino's. It was Gino Marchetti was a Colt football player. Alan Amici had a drive-in type place with the women carrying the trays out to the cars with the speaker phones. Also local, but those were replaced eventually by corporate things. And I think that just is kind of the way of the world, and it's unfortunate. But I think if you go, when I've gone back with my sister and brother-in-law and family, we've gone to some places in the city that are quite unique, quite specific to Baltimore's sense of the world. And I think it's, it goes back to neighborhood. It just goes back to neighborhood. There's some things that won't change, I think, for the corporate thing. Others that can more easily, but there's certainly a resistance. Yeah.
Well, and it is, it is different, better, and I think that a lot of local places have kind of reemerged, and that sense of place has kind of reemerged a little bit. I think there was probably a time when it was pretty low, but it does seem to be going a little bit better now. And
Yeah.
I have friends that lived out in Maryland, and I definitely wanted to go in the summertime and have crab. That was high on my list.
Yep.
It was always high on my list. I'd wonder if you would take some time now and read a little bit from the Chessmen and give us a little taste of the novel, and then I'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more.
Okay. I wrote an introduction, so I'm going to read that out. I'm going to be reading chapter 6, which starts on page 46. If you have your hymnals with you. Those do, I think, the best job of at least introducing Sonny and his circumstance. I will say that if anybody has issues about language, there's a little bit, not too much. It's as you get further into the book, they get saltier, but in this chapter, I don't think it's terribly bad. In the prior chapters, it's summer 62. We've met Sonny Wakefield, our main character, who's having just a really bad summer before his senior year of high school. He's walked away from playing tennis for the high school because he didn't get a letter. He doesn't feel like he has anybody to hang out with. He's spending a lot of time reading until the early hours of the morning and then sleeping in late. He's hung up on reading science fiction because reality is not doing him any favors at this point. So he gets an opportunity to audition for a new band. The band doesn't even have a name at this point, and the band plays rock covers, standards. The sax player can imitate Elvis, and certainly that's one of their calling cards. And it's a 4-man band at that point. Weedy, the drummer, Curtis, the leader of the group, who plays the rhythm guitar, and then there are 2 other guys whose names will emerge in the chapter. So Sonny gets a chance to audition for the band, and it just goes terribly because Curtis wants him to improvise to show whether he has jazz capabilities, and that's not what Sonny has learned how to do. He's a very good player, but he just doesn't know how to improvise, so it's a complete failure. And he likes one person to visit when he can, which is the librarian at his high school, who's a very, very sweet guy and is always easy to talk to. And those of you who are watching on from our DHS background will remember Mr. Murray, and Mr. Abrams is definitely modeled on Mr. Murray. So we begin chapter 6. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm leaving one thing out. He rides back from the library and he runs into a guy named Nelson that he knows from high school. And Nelson says, hey, why don't we put together a little band? My brother Gene is coming back out of the army, and we're going to have a huge party, and let's make some music, and it'll be fun. And so Sonny says, you know what? Sounds like fun. I'll do it. So Friday's rehearsal at Nelson's was dreadful and chaotic, but the gig for Saturday was still on. It would take a miracle, a small miracle, for the guys to gel. Sonny was up early Saturday morning going over the sheet music, working on some of the tricky parts here and there while saving his lip for later. When he arrived at Nelson's house, he was amazed at the transformation. Every inch was festooned with bright streamers, twirling whirligigs, and welcome home banners in garish colors. The basement was already sent up with Kent Downey's drum kit in place, Nelson's baritone sax on its stand, and Eddie Mullins' upright bass laying on its side like a crash victim. Sonny shook his head at the combo, 2 bass instruments with him carrying the treble lead. Definitely different. Hey man, Nelson called as he galumphed down the stairs. We're almost there. Gene is bringing his old guitar amp down with a mic so we can sing if we want to. Yeah, well, I don't want to. Don't believe it. Couple of beers in you, you won't be able to keep off the thing. Couple of beers and things might go south. You're forgetting. Nelson's face screwed up for a few seconds, then bloomed into a huge smile. Oh, yeah, that's right. In May, junior year, nearly over, Sonny had gone drinking with 2 guys from the school band in the park near the Y in Dundalk. He didn't tell them he'd never had alcohol before. First beer went down nicely, and it was so cool to sit in the dark under a big poplar tree, cigarette tips glowing, talking like a regular group of fellas. The second beer, however, hit Sonny's head like a gong. In short order, he was high as a kite, staggering around and singing so loudly the guys were trying to shush him in case the cops came by. He led them on a merry chase for a while, but in time they got him on the blue bus and aimed toward home. Safely in before his curfew, his parents already asleep, Sonny was congratulating himself on getting away with it when his bed tilted sideways into a whirling storm. He barely made it downstairs to the bathroom before hurling a cataclysmic gush into the toilet. You okay, Sonny? His mom asked, tapping lightly at the door. Yeah, I'm fine. Something I ate. You did anything? Ma, I'm all right. Good night then. Good, he began, but was interrupted by another gusher. The door opened a crack. Don't come in. Sonny, you've been drinking. Just a bad hot dog at Pinland, Mom. I'm okay. Don't lie to me. I can smell it from here. Sonny's response was a further variation on the previous barfing. Sonny, you go lay down as soon as you can. We'll talk in the morning. Yeah, okay. And he disgorged again. It took a while and he felt better finally, but his bed was the center of a swirling hell where no position could allay the room spin. He raced downstairs several more times until he was dry heaving, feeling like he'd cough up his aching balls any minute. It was after the 4th bout of retching hog slaughter sounds with nothing coming out that his mother intercepted him with a bottle of Coca-Cola syrup and a spoon. She sat him down at the kitchen table and gave him several doses until his stomach stopped clenching and he wasn't shaking as badly. Why don't you give me this stuff sooner? He whined, his throat raw. Because I wanted you to have a lesson you won't soon forget. Now go to bed and we'll deal with you in the morning. And she did, getting him up about 10 minutes after his father went for his usual Saturday morning trek to the steel mill to finish up the weekly report. After giving Sonny some coffee to make sure he could hold something down, his mother set him off on a day-long series of chores, mowing the lawn, weeding, washing the windows, hangover, pounding his head flat, reeking sweat, drenching him until he could feel the runnels soaking his socks. At school, he was a sort of an ironic hero. The stories of his drunken carrying on already far past true and into unwelcome legend. He discovered he had been crowned old 2 beers. Okay, 2 beers, Nelson said. You could stick to Pepsi or whatever. Yeah, I probably should. Around 9, the party was in full gabbling riot with the basement packed and people spilling out into the backyard. Dozens of Japanese lanterns were strung from the massive black oaks. Tiki torches were throwing flames and black smoke at the twilight sky. Nelson called the players together, and on Kent's drumstick countdown, they toppled into an up-tempo version of Night Train with all the gusto they could manage. Not only did it go better than any of them expected, but Nelson tore into the solo breaks with fervor on his Barry sax. They were launched. They'd rehearsed 10 of the songs from the charts and another 5 from the current top 40, figuring those selections would equal an hour, but they came up short. The crowd urged them to keep playing. Tell you what, Sonny said, overcoming his reluctance to use the mic, how about giving us a few minutes to see what else we can play, and we'll do some more for you. Right now, here's another moldy oldie but a definite goodie, and then we'll take that break. They rolled smoothly into A String of Pearls. Sonny was especially happy to play it. A beautiful, bright-eyed girl had been watching him from the other side of the basement for a while, and he knew he could rip up the trumpet solo, and he did. He hoped outside would be cooler than the basement. His shirt was soaked through. He kept an eye on the girls' progress while he moved with the crowd, many of them complimenting the music and slowing up his pursuit. God, she was beautiful and way out of his class. He laughed at himself, thinking he was like the dog chasing a car. What would he do if he actually caught her? He had to get on tiptoe to catch another glimpse of her, though she wasn't hard to spot. She had short, cropped, platinum blonde hair with curlicue sideburns that made her look as if she was wearing a helmet, and she was the palest human being he'd ever seen, like ivory. The hem of her sleeveless dress only reached mid-thigh, which drew various looks as she moved along, intense gazes from the guys, judgmental appraisals from the girls in their more staid outfits. The dress was a shimmery silver color that intensified the alabaster of her neck and arms. Sonny stopped to light a cigarette, trying to keep the girl in sight. He wasn't very good at meeting females, but sometimes at a party, it was a bit easier to slip sideways into a conversation. A cigarette was a good security prop. He was trying to work his way past a sprawl of people who were vying to talk to the returned soldier. Gene was everything Nelson wasn't, tall, well-built, with all-American good looks, a regular square-chinned poster boy. As Sonny edged past the group, he had already said hello to Gene, and that was about the limit of the conversation, since Sonny was clearly just some dumb kid in Gene's all-knowing eyes. Someone grabbed him by the elbow and spun him around. Jump, man, you were wailing up there. It was Weedy with his monkey man grin spread wide. Hey, hi, Weedy, what are you doing here? My brother Niccolo plays drums at Bittner's downtown. Gene used to come in there with his fake ID all the time to listen to the band, and my fake ID was just as good as his, so we got us buddied up a little. It's hard to imagine Weedy and Gene in the same world. Sonny was trying to keep an eye on the Silver Girl. She'd gone to the far end of the long yard where the oaks stood guard, then seemed to vanish. Fireflies were flashing, disappearing. Weedy leaned into his line of sight. How you doing otherwise? Sonny pulled away from him, from looking for the girl, and took Weedy in for a moment. Weedy's eyes looked weird, Sonny thought, glassy maybe, or filmy. He didn't have a word for it, but definitely not normal. Oh, I'm good, playing some tennis, hanging out, summer stuff, you know. Go. Weedy turned to look where Sonny's gaze kept focusing, then smiled. I'll get it. Come on. He started walking toward the oaks. What? Where? Sonny hesitated. Come on, man, jump up or live a sad little life of tears and regret, Weedy said with a smoky yellow laugh. Sonny hesitated, then followed. They rounded the biggest tree, and there was the Silver Girl, smoking a cigarette and sipping from a hip flask. Jelly, this is my favorite cat on the stand tonight, Weedy said. Hey, said the girl, mine too, Chop's baby for sure. Up close, she was even more stunningly beautiful than he'd first thought. Sweet femininity and soft planes around brilliant green eyes, a color so arresting it took his breath away. Hey, to you, Sonny managed to say. What is it, Jelly? Yeah, man, Weedy said, jellyfish, because she's so pale, man. You can see right through the girl. Oh, yeah, ha ha, hey, cool, Sonny blathered. And she can sting some, too. The girl set out a derisive plume of smoke. Jesus, Weedy. And that's my cue, he said, and walked away, his gait floaty and loose, arms buoyant, as if he was also a sea creature. I'm Sonny. I really dig your playing, Jelly said, and held out the flask. Sonny wasn't about to turn it down, but he made sure he only took a bit of the liquid. It didn't taste like anything he could identify, and it went down burning. Whoa, What is this? Tequila, she said. Mexican, made from cactus. Seriously? I just thought it was just the name of a tune. Let me see your hand, she said, quickly grabbing it. Her touch sent a shocked thrill up his arm. She maneuvered them beneath one of the Japanese lanterns and began examining Sonny's palm. He could feel her breath on his open hand. The back of her neck looked as fragile as a child's. He wanted to stroke the downy hair, bury his face in it. I washed earlier, I promised, he joked, every bit of him going pinkly warm. I'm looking at your heart line and lifeline. Huh, interesting. What is? Well, your heart line says you'll have many romances in your life, but see here, where this line crosses it? That's your lifeline, and it's telling me your greatest love might be just around the corner. Sonny wasn't listening. Her scent was rising like an ambrosial cloud. He could barely breathe. She straightened up and looked into his eyes. He realized that she was a bit glazed over like Wheatie. Was this what Tequila did? I really dug the way you played Blue Moon. Could you play it again for me? Sure, of course. Great, thanks. You're a pal. And before he could even register what was happening, she raised on tiptoe and kissed him on the mouth, lightly, lingering there for a few seconds, then half floated away toward the center of the yard where Wheatie was rooted, curved backward, gazing up at the sky. What the hell, he thought. Just before starting the next set, Nelson pulled Sonny aside. You don't need to yell into the mic, just put your mouth right up to it and let the speakers do the rest of the work. Sonny nodded, still floating on the kiss. The band fumbled and rumbled into the twist and on through the next batch of tunes. Sonny realized that the crowd didn't care about quality. They just wanted rhythmic noise to dance to. All the while, Jelly was at the back of the room, eyes seeming never to leave him. He smiled in her direction, but she gave no indication of seeing it, only staying greenly fixed on him through the smoke and dancer's movement. The lingering feel of her lips on his had him slightly tumescent. Could anyone tell? Could she? As they stopped to confer on the next song, Sonny said, I'd like to do Blue Moon while you guys are figuring out more tunes, but just on my own. Is that okay? Shrugs all around. We did it already, Nelson said. I know. It's a request from a girl. Well, get to it then, Romeo. He stepped to the mic, a special request from a certain person, he said directly into the mic in his normal voice at her, feeling the power of the speakers carrying him directly to her across the room. Sonny wet his lips, buzzed through them briefly, then moved the mouthpiece in place. He took a breath and sent the vibration into the horn, and out came Blue Moon as tenderly as he'd ever played it. He remembered how Terry had played at the audition, adding little half-note filigrees before the main notes, at times sliding up into the melody. He had practiced the technique and risked it on Blue Moon, making it his own voice. He closed his eyes, seeing the girl in his mind, talking to her through the song, lost in the connection between breath and embouchure and fingers and sound. When he opened his eyes for a brief moment, he was surprised that most people weren't dancing, but merely standing, some swaying, seemed to be as caught up in the music as he was. He finished the song, holding the last note as long as he could, softening it to let it fade a bit. A flurry of hand clapping followed. Sonny bowed slightly, then looked toward the girl. She was gone. Sonny started to leave the impromptu bandstand, but Nelson was already at the mic. For all the ladies, here's our destruction of yellow, the polka dot bikini, and immediately launched into it, bouncing the Barry from side to side with the staccato opening notes. Sonny played along miserably. He was determined to look for Jelly right after the song ended, and it wasn't helping that he kept picturing her in the swimsuit of the song. Be right back, he shouted at Nelson and dashed out of the basement. Too many Pepsis, I guess, Nelson said at the mic. He'll be back. Meanwhile, how about this? And he launched into Tequila. Sonny could hear the basement crowd roar behind him. He raced toward the oak trees, but no one was there. Circling the backyard, then the front, and finding no sight of the silver girl, he felt completely crushed. He sat on the curb between parked cars and shook his head. Jelly's scent was on his skin, a tinge of delicate perfume, and the faint whispers of tobacco and tequila. Damn this summer, he thought. Everything so weird.
Excellent. And we'll just imagine the applause in our heads, won't we?
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
That's right. That's right. Thank you very much for reading that. As you can tell, this is a book that you're going to want to jump right into and learn more about where Sonny is headed and where he's going to emerge from after this summer and into the fall. We have links to purchase the Chessmen from Magic City in the chat right now. You can also go to magiccitybooks.com after we're done if you don't want to break away from anything and risk losing your space here. Head over to magiccitybooks.com when we're done and you'll be able to buy the Chessmen. You'll also be able to buy a copy of Michael's earlier book, Down the Ocean, Summer of '64, available through our website as well. So a reminder also right now, as we take this just a moment here, that if you have questions for Michael, please post them in the Q&A and we will get to those as we're going along here with the rest of our conversation. Michael, I wanted to talk a little bit about just the role of music in this. I mean, obviously, Sonny's in a band and been playing tunes from the early '60s, and just kind of remembering that time. How did you kind of put yourself back in that time and that music? Did you listen to music as you were writing? Is that hard to do for you? How did that go?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. And that's at least a portion of my era, the late 50s. My generation, we were lucky because Elvis came along in the late 50s, and a little while later, the Beatles came along in roughly the mid 60s, and it was heaven music wise. So yeah, I'll tell you the truth. It's so vivid to me that I can still smell the old music charts that were stored next to the band room. Yeah, so very vivid, and just the band room and the couple of teachers that we had, and the choir room next door with the chorus group singing and the whole bit. So yeah, it was great.
Right. Yeah. We have a question here from Michael, and he would like to know, are you a musician and can you play Blue Moon?
No, I quit playing trumpet myself. Sonny didn't, but I quit playing trumpet after I left high school because I went to Essex Community College and there was no music program. And in the interim, I had been involved through some friends in theater, and I wanted to learn how to direct and how to write plays, and got talked into performing in a show that had a huge cast. And once I got on stage, I really loved that. So I didn't exactly leave music entirely behind in my own life, because I came back to it a few times and played in various other ways throughout. And I do a great deal of singing around the house, I'll have you know. But the reality is that I don't play an instrument anymore. No.
So much of the music in this book is kind of the time frame. My mom graduated high school in '63, and so the music that I listened to, that she would play, and those stations now, and it gets harder and harder to be able to find it. It's certainly on the radio, it's harder to find the music, but through streaming services and everything now, it remains the music that kind of is easy for us to listen to with our 2-year-old as well. So we like kind of splish splash as we go into the bath, and
I'll be there. Yep,
that's right. I also, we talked a lot about Baltimore and Maryland, but also that chapter just was really brought us into that kind of basement party that you go to in high school, and whether there was a band there or there wasn't, or there was drinking or there wasn't, or whatever it was. I mean, you did such a great job of kind of capturing that time when you're 17 or 15 or 19 or whatever been, and people are new, and you're discovering, you meet people at this thing and you don't really know too much about it, and they're a friend of a friend of a friend, and all that, and just kind of talk about putting yourself back into that time in your life, because to me, that represents a specific time, and kind of after a while, those kinds of encounters and happenings just didn't quite work in quite the same way anymore.
Well, we had the house parties, yeah. Although you had to be careful whose house party it was, because there were some neighborhoods where you weren't actually welcome. But we had teen center, And teen center was, music all night, mostly on discs, but sometimes live music. I think there was a band called the Admirals that played at the teen center I went to. And it was a great place to um, again, hang out and meet people. Although I had mostly like a little crew of people that I ran with, and we didn't expand that too terribly much. So, but it was the teen center, probably me and a couple of other guys going out and scoring some booze from an older person and getting a little bit happy, and then going to teen center or getting very happy. And then after that, going to one of the local burger joints or that kind of stuff, and there was friends from Dundalk High will remember very clearly that there was basically a circuit that went from Amici's to the Geno's that was out near Eastern Avenue, et cetera, et cetera. So, it was when Happy Days came out, I was like, hey, I know that. When American Graffiti came out, I was like, hey, I know that place. Yeah, I know those people and all that stuff. So yeah, I loved it. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even growing up 30 years later and being in high school in the late 90s, before ubiquitous cell phones, certainly before social media platforms and stuff like that, I mean, growing up in Eastern Iowa, it was, for us and in my class, it was a McDonald's parking lot, and that's where you headed after a game, or at 5 o'clock at night, see what was happening. If there was anybody there, that's where you might be able to catch up with whatever else was happening that night, and move on to the next thing. So yeah, that's it just, even though I'm from another generation forward, it still felt very familiar. Those sections of the book just really kind of connected there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and when I got here, I was told about people who drag race on Sheridan, and find corners to hang out on. I would assume they're not hanging out there tonight, but you never know.
Yeah,
So yeah,
right.
I think teenagers have got to create their own worlds. It's just part of the experience of going from being somebody's child to being your own person. So yeah, it was all
Yeah.
part of that.
Yeah.
Yep.
You alluded to a librarian that kind of helps Sonny along a little bit and introduces him to some literature and things. And you kind of referenced right before you started reading that he's based on a person from your high school. Can you talk a little bit more about the role that teachers and librarians, or whomever it was, but I mean those adults in your life, non-parents, that kind of came in and helped you through, or help people and continue to help people through?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think my story is a little different maybe than some of my classmates. Most of my teachers would have preferred that I just go away, because I was a rebel and I just couldn't keep my mouth shut half the time. I had two great teachers. One in my ninth grade year, Mr. Ben Herman, who year after year after I left Baltimore and went into the Air Force, which is what the third book is about. It's called In the Air. I'd go back to see Ben when I went to Baltimore, and we would talk and hang out. And he was always my great writing mentor, great encouragement for sure. The librarian, Mr. Murray, he's just like a cool guy, and he actually in a lot of ways influenced me to think of moving to New York, because he was just such a cool New Yorker guy. He would say stuff like, "Kids love me, love my dog." Okay, and we were just like, most of them like, "What the hell is he talking about?" And then we had a great English teacher named Carmela DeFlora, who I think is still with us, and she was just fantastic. I loved her dearly. She was actually responsible for taking the short play that I had written and giving it to some people who then produced it. So, and that was so thrilling to see, what I saw in my head come to life, and it led to my downfall of a career in the theater world. So those are the ones that stood out. There's another guy. And I'm not going to be able to grab his name easily off the top of my head. Oscar, I can't think of his last name, but he was a wild man. He was a very active socialist, and didn't hold back from talking about it. And he brought in visitors to the classroom that absolutely blew our minds. And I mean, not necessarily in the best way out of their intention. He brought in a guy who was a white racist and was like telling, this is all this stuff, and we just sat there going, oh my God, I don't want to be anything like this guy. So he really brought us into a great circumstance as a teacher, and yeah, had a huge influence on me. It only lasted a year.
Yeah,
And
right,
looking back, I'm surprised he made it that far, to tell you the truth. Yeah. So,
right.
but yeah, but most of the teachers they were okay. I'm sure other people from my high school had favorites that they liked a lot, but I dropped away from the honors type classes for my senior year because I just had it. I just wanted to be in with like regular kids. So maybe I missed opportunities, but I just, I was happier with the ones that said to me, "Hey, you got something good going," and I just attached myself to them.
Yeah, yeah. Gail chimed in that she thinks it's Oscar Meiler, Mieler.
Yeah, I think that's
That
it.
sounds right.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Gail,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
helping us out. Yeah.
Gail's one of my classmates. So yeah. Hey, Gail.
I want to talk a little bit about writing dialogue. As a playwright, and where and having written a lot of work for the stage, dialogue is so important, and just kind of where you felt, was that something that just kind of comes naturally, and some of the other stuff is harder to write, or does the dialogue, are you a little bit more aware of it, and are you hearing it in your ear more than seeing it on the page, or how's that dialogue kind of coming through for you?
Well, the dialogue actually comes pretty easily because, as you say, from the theater background, when I'm doing descriptive stuff, I'm trying always to find a way to word it that is vivid enough without feeling pretentious or literary, because that's not my groove. So I'm looking for moments, and I'm one of my different other books, I write books that are related to helping yourself discover your capabilities as a playwright or a screenwriter. So my most recent academic book a couple of years back is called Sensory Writing for Stage and Screen. And so whenever I'm describing something, I try to keep an awareness of how does it smell, how does it taste, how does it feel, if there's any opportunities for that kind of stuff. So those are a little bit more work in general, to just try to be as vivid as I can, and to hope that it evokes something in the readers. There are things that are just with you no matter what. If anybody has ever played any kind of a horn, for example, like the first thing you smell from a trumpet is valve oil, and that you cannot ever not smell that smell if you think about it for 2 seconds. Same thing with woodwinds, and the taste and the smell of the reed and all the other stuff that goes along with it. So trying to slip into the skin of that in some kind of way, it's very important to me to try to capture that stuff. So as far as the dialogue, yeah, and somebody commented that this is a much more dialogue heavy novel than Down the Ocean is, and I didn't realize it, but yeah, it's true, I think. And it's because there's a lot of characters, and they're musicians, and they're argumentative people, and they talk a lot. So yeah.
It's interesting, the sensory aspect of it. I haven't picked up a tuba since I was in high school, and I can still smell
Right.
and everything else about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you talked about being in that place, and the band room next to the choir room and everything. It's the same at my high school, and anyone else that was involved in music in school probably had a similar experience, and they can put themselves right back in there, and
Right.
just different enough from the course of the regular day. So yeah. Shelley asks, so much of your 2 novels seem grounded in revisiting your own journey. How did it feel time traveling? Was it cathartic? Was it fun? Was it not so fun? And was it what you expected?
I would say for both of them, it was a lot of fun, because I got to re-encounter, and again, these are not autobiographical. These are all fictional characters. The main characters are an amalgam of me and half a dozen other people that I've crossed paths with. The third novel is a little less based on the idea of it just being a very simple, straightforward story. It's much more complex, and the character will be doing things that people might find a need to judge differently than the other 2 guys that are characters. but having said that, yeah, writing, I just loved, I mean, Down the Ocean, I mean, it just came out in a lot of ways, and I don't plan or plot or do any of that kind of stuff. I'd rather get lost than try to outline, because if I outline, it just dries up. It's just my nature as a writer. So yeah, they were both a lot of fun to write. And the bars where they went, and the ocean side, riverside places that are still very popular in Baltimore, Dundalk, all those places, very evocative for me, and very evocative in terms of, not only memories, but just the sense of being back in an environment where I wasn't in this particular body. I was in a much younger body, and so moving in that body and feeling it in that body, and even that brain, because my brain has also changed since that time. All those things are interesting and and fun elements to look to, so.
Well, I want to thank everyone again for joining us this evening, and a reminder that you can pick up a copy of The Chessmen by Michael Wright from the links that we have in the chat, or go to magiccitybooks.com and be able to join us there. It's so wonderful that we were able to do this virtually and not have to worry about getting out in the ice and snow here in Tulsa. And also to be able to have folks join us from Maryland or elsewhere around the country and be able to do that. I just have one last question that I want to have before we go, and that is just, the kind of working with a character. You mentioned that you don't like to outline, and you kind of want to be able to kind of continue to get lost in this as you go. Are you somebody who like takes a long time to finish something because you don't like the direction that it goes, or do you kind of write yourself out of those problems as they kind of come up and then move?
Yeah, definitely more the latter. I just wrote a chapter a couple of weeks ago and spent most of last week rewriting it about 6 or 7 times. It just kept drifting and losing energy, and I kept thinking, okay, what's wrong? And finally, I thought, oh, okay, I forgot to central place this particular aspect of it. This is not, I mean, the new novel is not as driven in a lot of ways. The character is maybe being driven to a certain extent, and it's a softer story in some ways, and yet it's about much harder things to deal with. So yeah, we're in the first 2 novels, both characters are highly motivated in pursuit of something, where Danny in the new novel he's highly motivated, but he's away from home for the first time, and he doesn't know what he's doing. So it's trial and error experiment and lots of failures.
Yeah. We have one more question that came in from Rick just before we go. Rick wants to know, who did you learn from the most?
Well, I'd probably Ben Herman in high school, but I would be neglectful if I didn't mention a brilliant guy at Rollins College named Edward Cohen, who was a great writing mentor, just brilliant, and really encouraging, really pushed me and helped me a lot. So, I mean, there've been various people along the way. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Michael, very much for joining us tonight and sharing a little bit of your stories and talking to everybody. We look forward to having you in person for book 3. Hopefully, the vaccine has rolled out and we're all safe to be able to gather again and get back to doing these in person. And so,
yep.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure, and better luck next year, Ravens. We'll see you.
That's right. Thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you again at another virtual event with Magic City Books. Take care. Be well. See you soon.
Okay. Bye, everybody.